US calls itself a global leader, but across Africa, its diplomatic footprint appears to be quietly shrinking. From Abuja to Kigali, Washington is operating without confirmed ambassadors in key capitals following a wave of recalls and delayed appointments under President Donald Trump. Countries like Nigeria, Uganda, Senegal, and Cameroon, strategic partners in security, trade, and regional stability, are now dealing with acting envoys instead of full diplomatic representation at a time when China and Russia are expanding their influence across the continent. Critics say America is leaving a vacuum, one that could reshape alliances and weaken its voice in Africa's future. So what's behind these delays? Is this a deliberate reset of US foreign policy or a costly diplomatic gap? Rita Osakwe has this report.
As the US navigates an increasingly competitive global landscape, its diplomatic footprint in Africa is thinning. As of early 2026, President Donald Trump's administration has yet to appoint or secure Senate confirmation for a full slate of ambassadors across the African continent. In several key countries, including Nigeria, there is currently no confirmed US ambassador. Instead, embassies are being led by chargés d'affaires, career diplomats serving as acting heads of mission. Similar vacancies stretch across countries like Niger, Uganda, Senegal, Somalia, and Rwanda. In many of these cases, ambassadors were recalled or completed their terms, but replacements have not yet been confirmed. The vacancies come at a pivotal moment. Strategic competition in Africa is intensifying, particularly with China and Russia expanding their economic and security footprints across the continent. Relations with South Africa were strained last year following diplomatic tensions. A new US ambassador has since taken up the post, but analysts say the episode underscored the fragility of some bilateral relationships. For African governments navigating shifting alliances, the absence of confirmed US ambassadors sends a message, intentional or not, about Washington's level of engagement. And as the year unfolds, there are questions about whether these diplomatic gaps will be filled or whether the vacuum will widen. Rita Osakwe, Arise News.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by Nigeria's former permanent representative at the UN in Geneva, Ambassador Humphrey Orjiakor. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Good to see you again.
Thank you so much, Charles, for having me. Thank you.
Now, you've represented Nigeria at the highest diplomatic levels. When a country like the US leaves key embassies without ambassadors, is that a signal or simply a stalling issue? Because one has to wonder whether under President Trump we're looking at a deliberate downgrading of Africa in US foreign policy or just administrative delays.
Charles, thank you for bringing me here on this subject, especially at this time that President Donald Trump is actually upending what we usually understood to be global geopolitics and these operations across the world. But what you've just said could also be said of Nigeria, that in the past...
I was going to get to that, but I wanted you to deal with the Americans first. Right. I mean, we can't have you here and not talk about that.
So the fact is President Donald Trump, as has been noted by so many analysts, is a transactional president. And the calculation he and his officials are doing, those who work for him directly these days, tend to be where the transaction is most profitable. They tend to concentrate effort in that area. However, there is something many of us outside the diplomatic practice miss all the time. That is, take a country like Nigeria, and we've been complaining about this for a very long time. If a country's representative, who is not a plenipotentiary, that's not an extraordinary, it's not an appointment of the president or head of state, He's just a career diplomat who's working and being the most senior, who's the chargé d'affaires. If you give him access, if he has free access to some of the commanding authorities of the host country, sometimes including the president. In fact, in the case of Nigeria, that includes the president. That includes the vice president and so many other officials at that level. And they give him audience. He has access to the State House and so on. He is accomplishing on the cheap what a plenipotentiary will be lobbying actually to get those access, but it's being given to him for free. So sometimes I look at the African condition, African situation, and I see that playing out. If the American government wants something from the presidency, there's a process. You have to go through some department in the foreign ministry that goes up to the foreign minister until it gets to the... But in Nigeria, you'll be surprised that a first secretary, a councillor, can walk straight to the villa and get every information or every piece of goodie he wants and send it back to Washington. The downside of that is that if you saw when they bombed the Americans dropped some tomahawks in Sokoto, there was this either New York Times or Wall Street that said it was some screwdriver saline on.
We had that man. We interviewed him on this program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is ridiculous, and the ridiculousness of that may arise from the fact that there was no plenipotentiary of the U.S. government here, because his word would carry weight, not the word of lobbyists, not the word of... but does he, as a chargé of America in Abuja, does he have access even to the Secretary of State? He probably doesn't have that. For him to have that access, he may have to go through the hierarchy. Yes.
Well, that's a very interesting assessment, and thank you for putting that out, because obviously you've got the inside track on these things, which we don't have. And for a country like Nigeria, from what I understand, you're saying it's significant that it is engaging with Washington without a confirmed U.S. ambassador on the ground in this country. And I wonder whether that weakens Nigeria's leverage in negotiations on things like security, trade, and development?
In fact, there is no gainsaying that question. Sometimes administrations have their priorities. If an administration doesn't totally award the appropriate level of priority to foreign policy, it may be for some reasons outsiders may not understand. Like me, I wouldn't understand that. But it's also a fact that foreign policy is one of the key instruments any government has to resolve most of its domestic and external problems. So the idea of a plenipotentiary is a trustee of the president. That's what the letter of credence says. The president or head of state says, my fellow president or head of state, this person I'm sending to you is my trustee. Deal with him. Anything he tells you, regard it as coming from me.
So in other words, in practical terms, something substantial gets lost when diplomacy is handled by acting envoys instead of ambassadors.
Absolutely, absolutely. First of all, the issue of access. I served in Washington, D.C. for 4 years as a very senior diplomat, actually as a minister. And it was difficult for me to even penetrate the State Department, let alone aim to go to the White House and get anything. You have to have that authority from the president to say, I demand to see the Secretary of State. I demand to see somebody high up in the White House. So if that is missing in the case of Nigeria on both sides, unfortunately, and I think by now Nigeria would have realized that it must have been some kind of error, some administrative error or some policy error to not have had a plenipotentiary in Washington over these past few years.
Well, let me pick you up on that, since that's the second time you're going to it, and obviously that's a crucial thing. Let's look at reciprocity. and Nigeria's own posture. Can this country credibly criticize this situation when it has also faced delays in deploying its own ambassadors? Is this perhaps a moment for Nigeria to rethink its own diplomatic urgency and presence globally?
I think the government has finally rethought that urgency.
Well, I mean, they've appointed people as designates, but they haven't assigned them.
They've appointed them, they have screened them through the Senate and so on. But there is a process. Probably this is what they didn't understand on time, that even though you've screened and appointed ambassadors, they need to be accepted by the host country. And that is what they call agreement. The host government has to agree that, Mr. President, we have seen who you are trying to send to us. We accept him, he can come. Until you get that piece of document, you go, if you travel, you are wasting your time there, actually, because nobody will deal with you. Yes, you are not recognized. So that we waited this long, yes, was definitely a strategic miscalculation, especially for certain missions where you have very strategic issues to deal with. Washington, this is one of them.
And are you impressed with the caliber of people who've been picked to be ambassadors designate?
You know, Charles, I gave an interview, I think, to one of the TV channels, I don't know which one now, and they asked this question, and I almost name names because right now something is going on in the diplomatic community, the community of senior career ambassadors. They are quarreling over the misuse of the nomenclature ambassador. Every Tom, Dick, Harry you see everywhere these days answers ambassador. When you ask questions, is some ambassador of this, ambassador of some president, ambassador and stuff like that. So it's confusing.
Right.
So when a government appoints an ambassador, the president or the head of state appointing is saying something. I think I've said this before. We have examined this man in terms of knowledge, in terms of character, in terms of behavior, in terms of his personal courage, and everything about him satisfies me as head of state of this country. That's why I'm sending him to you as my trustee. So whatever you need to tell me, please tell him. If you now go out of your way to appoint people with certain controversies about their personalities and their characters, people who are not talked very well about by the general public, you're already raising a problem for both the mission you're sending them to and for the community that's already bastardizing if so and so can be ambassador, why can't I? In fact, somebody put it in our platform, Association of Retired Career Ambassadors. He said, even Onisha traders like the screwdriver seller can now be ambassador of because his word apparently was taken seriously in Washington, D.C., and Nigeria had no legitimate authority to speak for it. We hear their lobbies, but I do not in any way think that lobbies, no matter how well placed and regarded, could begin to substitute for the president's representative in the capital of another country.
When I listen to your assessment, it does make one feel a bit regretful about the way things keep evolving in certain directions in this country. But let me return to the issue of the US and Nigeria, and Africa, with China and Russia expanding their influence across Africa. Is the US effectively conceding strategic ground? I mean, from your experience, how quickly do diplomatic vacuums like this get filled by rival powers.
Honestly, Charles, I wish I could speak for Nigeria instead of for the United States.
Right.
But the fact is, even for a superpower like the United States, leaving a vacuum like this in some strategic places, like look at from the Sahel down through to Nigeria. Why should a country as interested, as invested in Africa, as the United States is, have a vacuum in its mission? In fact, the American mission in Abuja is one of the biggest in the world.
Indeed.
To the best of my knowledge. So to keep such a place vacant, I'm not just talking of the building, I'm talking of its strategic significance. That the United States government over the years considered it important enough to erect such edifice in a country like Nigeria means that there are so many crucial issues of common interests, of strategic interests, of global geopolitics that Nigeria and the United States could play together. When you leave that open, I begin to see the kind of complaint I saw in the letter the Congress is said to have sent to President Trump about relations with Nigeria lately, a couple of days ago. We had including things like trying to obviate the influence of China, Russia, and all of that in the country. Who caused that? That is the vacuum you created.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And let me turn back to Nigeria, which, as you have stated, is your area of speciality and preference. 3 years into President Tinubu's administration, and I think you touched on this briefly, many ambassadors designate have been named, but their postings remain unfilled. From your experience, is this a strategic pause or a dangerous vacuum in Nigeria's foreign policy? And in your time in service, would a delay of this magnitude have been considered normal or a breakdown of diplomatic coordination?
I think, as I said earlier, every administration sets its priorities. And if the priority of any administration doesn't include foreign policy, which in my view it should include always, because domestic issues, when they arise, you can spin them around, you can take certain actions to ameliorate or to contain. When it happens from the external environment, it's almost always outside of your own control. And that is why serious governments that take global relations, bilateral important global relations seriously, they do not joke with creating that vacuum. So for 3 years, it's a pretty long time. And in my own experience, 35 years in the Foreign Service, I don't think there was any time, not to the best of my knowledge, when Nigeria had vacant missions in this way. We have had so many reasons and excuses. The original things we were hearing was funding, budgetary difficulties, and so on. But again, in diplomatic circles, that is very difficult to sell, especially when it is all around all the missions, not no exceptions made. That becomes a hard sell. So now I'm hoping, in fact, I'm hoping that since they have come to this level of process, what is holding it is agreement from some of the key countries they wish to dispatch people as quickly as possible, because the financial reason as excuse is a bit not convincing. The issue of whether agreements have been received from some of the countries, I do not know, I would not know. That may be an issue. But the key thing is, even in this kind of situation, where recent events in the security sector of Nigeria itself has shown how crucial it is to have these representations outside, I would have thought that something would be done to accelerate the process.
Right, but if these people's names, have been sent to those countries and they're awaiting their response, at what stage are the the postings of people made public? Is it after they're accepted?
Exactly.
Or do you then just say, look,
is,
this person has been posted here and we're waiting?
It is prudent. It is prudent to wait for the agreement to arrive before you announce that somebody is going somewhere. Because I have had to deal. I was director of about 4 foreign ministers, and there was a particular case, very high-profile case of a posting to London. It caused a lot of trouble when it was announced in advance, and ultimately the British government said, no, we can't have it.
But I'm curious, because the reason I asked that question is that I've spoken to a number of the ambassadors designate. In fact, I was with one of them last night, and they don't seem to know where they're going.
They probably wouldn't know either, but some that ought to know would foreign ministry would tell them, listen, we are thinking of so place. It is not official yet. And if it's not official, some you tell them, they already go to their villages and towns and start throwing parties and celebrating. And when it comes out that, no, they couldn't go there, it becomes a problem. Now, I've seen that before. Somebody was hoping to go to China. Eventually, they sent him to Vienna. And he raised hell because his home people who were business people who wanted to go to China. So you deceived us, you know. So this
very interesting. The fascinating world of international diplomacy.
Indeed it is.
You're very privileged to have been part of it and on the level that you were. And I want to thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Humphrey Orjiakor, Nigeria's former permanent representative at the UN in Geneva. And that is a choice position. I'm sure a lot of these guys would want to be in that position.
They wouldn't. Only career people
get to go there.
To Geneva, yes.
Okay,
yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you,
appreciate your being here.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.